Hello, everybody. My name is Noz Urbina. Welcome back to the Truth Collapse podcast. I am going to be talking today with Dan Brown. It's not the Dan Brown from the Da Vinci Code, but an information architect whose background really mirrors my own in a quite almost spooky way. We have a lot of common interests, a lot of common big stations that we stopped at on the railroad of life to get to where we are now, talking about misinformation, design, disinformation, and the crisis that we're living through, which is a truth collapse, epistemological collapse. This podcast is getting more intense, more visceral for me every episode. When we were talking about these issues in bars 5-10 years ago, it was all, not really, it wasn't theory, but it was in the future. And today it's, for many of us, it's really something that's in our feeds, in our families, in our institutions, something that we're feeling even in our own minds when we have trouble feeling comfortable that we know what is real or not anymore. Reality itself seems to be up for debate today. So this podcast exists because I, like many of you, started to ask these harder questions. Not just about what's true, but how do we come to believe anything in the first place, and how do we establish some sort of methods to know what is true and how to have productive dialogues. And then also, because of my particular background, how do our systems, technological, social, economic, shape what we think and how? We also have the role of design in this crisis. A lot of this has to do with technical systems, applications, platforms that mediate our daily lives. And whether we're in tech or not, we are a stakeholder. We're a user. We're putting in money into these systems. We're giving them our attention. We are potentially the designers and maybe even funders of these systems. So how are we complicit? And knowingly or not, we have all participated. So what do we do now? In this episode, I speak with Dan, and we both came up through the digital space. What used to be feel like a sandbox of creativity and connection, and now find ourselves confronting the dark mirror that it has become of society. So we explore not how disinformation spreads, but how systems allow or even facilitate it, and we talk about incentives, complicity, the war for attention, design ethics, and how we might do something differently. If you are a user, if you are in business, what might good look like? How could we do something differently? This is not a doomcast. I know that this is a very hard topic, and the stakes are high, but the problems are systemic, and they can be corrected. Dan and I are both optimistic that we will get through this. The question is, how rough will the ride be, and how long will it take? So we're here not for outrage, but for awareness, reflection, discussion, and ultimately the possibility of action. So I thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoy the episode. Please do let your friends know, as we try not to be aggressive marketers, because that could be off-brand. So we do rely on your feedback and your sharing of our work to be able to keep doing the work that we're doing. So without any further ado, I bring you Dan Brown, host of the Unchecked podcast that looks at how design and information architecture can impact the flow of disinformation, and also leader of Curious Squid, his consultancy that tries to put in good and ethical solutions in technology and digital. Hello, everybody. This is your host, Noz Urbina, on the Truth Collapse podcast, here with my guest, Dan Brown from Curious Squid.
Noz, how are you?
Good. Happy to have you, Dan. So, Dan, you have an interesting background, very similar to my own. I started as a jack of all trades in the digital space.
Yes.
So, you want to introduce yourself a little bit and tell us a little bit how you came to be interested in the topics that you talk about. So you talk about on your Unchecked podcast that deals with misinformation today.
Sure. Yeah. I as you said, I got started in web design, kind of doing a jack of all trades, and eventually came to focus on information architecture. I ran or co-ran an agency based here in the DC area called Eight Shapes for 18 years with my business partner Nathan Curtis, and then last year we sunsetted Eight Shapes, and I struck out on my own, and it gave me a really good opportunity to focus more on information architecture. I'd been sort of doing general UX stuff, and I wanted to focus more on IA related work. And fortunately, I've been fortunate that I've been able to do that. When I started Curious Squid, I knew we were kind of getting into a place with the market for UX consulting where it would be, it's a very crowded market. There's a lot of competition. There's less money going around for consulting. So I wanted to ramp up my marketing efforts. And people who've been following me know that I really just like kind of contributing to the conversation in the field about information architecture. A few years ago, I had done a podcast called A Lens a Day, where I had these kind of short, very technical conversations about information architecture with a wide variety of information architects from around the industry. It was great. It was intense. I literally produced a different conversation every day for 50 days. So I was thinking about what I could do, what I could podcast on. And then the election in 2024 happened, and it sort of brought into sharp focus something that we worldwide had been experiencing for the better part of a decade, which is sort of the proliferation of disinformation. It's not new, right? People have been doing this for literally as long as humanity has been around. There's been disinformation, but it seemed to be a lot more prevalent and enabled by the very technologies that I was working on. And I was really sort of puzzled by the way disinformation is talked about, because it's talked about as the people who produce the disinformation and then the people who consume the disinformation. And you and I are user experience people. We know that in any system, there are many, many more stakeholders, many, many more personas involved. And I thought, I play a role. I play a role in designing the systems that mediate between the people creating information and the people consuming information. And for a long time, we thought, well, we're designing enterprise products, or we're designing, we're not the ones designing the products where people get this information. What role can we play? What role do designers play? And that sort of became the hook for this podcast of really, I really think of it as me going back to school to try and learn what is disinformation, how does it work, and what role can designers play to fight disinformation from the perspective that we have. So I'll leave it there, but that's kind of the how we sort of arrived at the idea.
Awesome. I've asked this of kind of mixed crowds as well. This podcast isn't for any particular. It's like not an industry podcast for UX professionals or digital professionals, but I think that there a lot of people asking, were we complicit?
Mm.
A lot of people are looking at tools that they've used, known, loved for years, and they're looking at them through new eyes, going, Twitter was just a fun thing to share my restaurant photos on. I didn't know I was, participating in something that was taking down democracies. And who knew and when did we know? I think the general public, everyone wants to ask those questions.
Yeah.
And then also, if we are in business, if we are in enterprise, I do know that the audience has a lot of people in business and enterprise listening, or you're some stakeholder in some kind of business. How can we be aware of these issues? So
Right.
if we're inputting requirements or requests, or we're chasing the almighty engagement, we want people to see our stuff, then for me, a lot of this has always come back down to, when you create a system, the incentives will drive the outcomes, And so if we've incentivized everyone in a blood sport arena battle for limited attention, then that incentive shapes the entire environment. It shapes the medium, it shapes the actors involved, it shapes the economics. So, yeah, how can somebody who's designing, and you don't have to be restricted to like a UX designer, but we're all participants in the design of these projects, missions, goals. How can we be more aware of these things, and what have we done?
It's a great question. I'll take that in two parts. I think in terms of are we complicit or were we complicit? I think that's a complicated question that everyone needs to answer for themselves. I prefer, generally speaking, with everything in my life, to look forward and just to ask, what can I be doing better from now on? And that's where this podcast came from, is sort of this idea, like, okay, whatever's happened till now, I need to adjust my practice. I need to do something differently than I have been doing, and I don't know what that is. Obviously, I never did any work for Twitter personally, so I feel maybe it lets me off the hook, but does it? I posted a lot to Twitter. I had amassed 15,000 followers on Twitter just organically. Now, a lot of those people thought that I wrote the Da Vinci Code. So, but I'll take audience where I can get them. And as much as I tried to use that platform for good, I was also putting information out in the world that subsequently was scraped to use, by AI, by ChatGPT to build their models. I was contributing to this desire to get likes, right? It's a thing that I have felt and thought about, and never took that step back to go, what am I doing here? Because, as you say, my incentives personally were to amass an audience, to generate business, to get an income, to provide for my family, whatever that looks like or might be. So I think that's a hard question to answer. I do think it's worth individuals kind of reflecting on that and what your role in that has been. Even if, like me, I feel like I can say, well, as a designer working on enterprise systems, really, what could I have done? And that's the point, is that there is stuff I could have been doing differently. I didn't know it at the time, but there is stuff I can be doing differently, even if I'm never working on a social media website.
Can I jump in there? Because
Yeah,
I
go
think
for it.
there's a key word you've talked about, which is knowing. And when I think about the answer, my own answer to this question is that very few people in the world actually had access to the big picture of what was going on.
Right.
In the same, like, there are examples in society. I always bring it up, like, we know that, Nike or Nestle was using child labor or dumping
Right.
bad product in Africa. And did those companies go out of business? No, we just kept buying their products.
Right.
So there's many times where we collectively shrugged off
Yes.
harm. But in this case, I don't think we even most of us didn't have the opportunity to shrug off the harm because we just didn't know. There's
Right.
like a very tiny, like, maybe 100, 200 people on the planet who 10 years ago had any visibility into the what was happening here. And so I think most people can sleep soundly at night because you were participating in a system that was bigger than you, and you didn't have the knowledge of what the externalities and the bigger picture of that was.
Even if you
It's
could
only if
ask
you
the
had that knowledge and still made decisions
yes.
for your own
That
interests can you really be pointed a finger at.
And even if we were to ask ourselves, say 15 years ago, the question, now 15 years ago, the question, how bad could this possibly be? Or what could they possibly do with this? There were people who were speculating about this back then. They looked all, sort of, how do I say this? They looked like they were miring themselves in conspiracy theories, right? Because they seemed a little wacko, right? Um, they, and there was like no meaningful, productive answer to that question. What could we do about it? Like, even if we had the sense that it was happening, as you say, those systems seemed so big. And we talk about this on the podcast a little bit, right? Some of these problems that people are dealing with are what a term that was introduced to me are hyperobjects, right? These kind of concepts that are just so big and systems that are so complex, and we play a role in them, but they're too big for us to even understand our role in them. Um, Even if we could ask ourselves those questions back then, it it seemed insurmountable. It seemed like not anything that us as individuals can do other than choose to not participate, which for some of us just didn't seem like an option. And at the same time, I felt like we also couldn't know just how bad it was going to get. When you read about some of the stuff that ChatGPT has done with their data, some of the ways in which that they have sort of created their models, it is just downright terrifying. And you think it never even entered into my imagination that that was a possibility, that those things could happen. If nothing else, what can we do about it now? We can continue to ask these questions, right? Questions that I did not ask myself 10, 15 years ago, I am now asking. It's not big, it's not enough, but it's a start.
Okay. So I have infinite things to say, but please, where do you feel that you can start to make a difference? Because I think a lot of people, when I talk about this podcast, they're like, "Oh, I can't listen to another. We're all going to die. Robots, misinformation,
Right.
autocracies." Like, so, what do you kind of look at it in terms of ways to help raise awareness or about what we can do or actions that we can take?
Look at this, for better for worse, as kind of just the next thing in line for, let's call them structural revolutions that have happened in the design practice. You could say something like accessibility was an important structural revolution that is still happening right as we speak. We ignored it. It became a thing that we needed to pay attention to. And now we are sort of constantly thinking about how do we literally change our design process to make it more inclusive, to create products that are more widely accessible. Responsive design, another kind of structural revolution that happened. We went from everyone more or less having kind of a desktop screen to having a wide variety of screens to deal with this. Really forced us to rethink how we do the work that we do. There are others, right? Other kind of structural revolutions in design that punctuate when you have careers as long as you and I have had, that punctuate our careers, that really represent kind of fundamental shifts in how we thought about and how we did this work. For even though disinformation has been around for it's literally been around since the dawn of civilization. The introduction of these technologies, the way people engage with information, have created a new set of challenges, which will compel us to build our systems differently. We don't have the standards that come with accessibility. We don't have kind of the deep thinking that came around responsive design. None of that exists yet. Yet. And I think I'm trying to do my small part for cultivating a set of tools that will transform how designers approach their work in creating information spaces. And I have a big ego, but I do not think I'm going to significantly move the needle on this.
By the end of the episode, I'm expecting you to solve this.
In fact,
Dan, I invited you on so you could fix it.
When I originally conceived of Unchecked, I was like, maybe I got 6 episodes in this. Maybe I can kind of squeeze 6 episodes. And we just dropped our 7th episode. And Rachel and I joke at the very beginning, like, oh, I guess we're still here. I guess we haven't fixed this yet. This is one of those things like accessibility, where when you start thinking about it even a little bit, you realize just how deep it is, how complex it is, how deep it is, how interesting a problem it is. And I'm not trying to compare levels of harm here, but harm happens when you make systems that are not accessible and when you make systems that permit, that are not resilient against disinformation.
So what does a system that is resilient against disinformation look like? And how do I know if I'm creating one that isn't?
That's a great question. And I think designers have long thrown up their hands and said, we're not responsible for creating resilient systems of information. So I think we don't have a lot of examples. And that's one thing that Rachel and I have discovered is that as we're talking to people and asking them about their domains, the mechanisms that exist to deal with disinformation are either very technical, like a sort of publication review process, which can even be, in science, which can even be circumvented, or are
And it's very niche.
and it's very niche, right? Is not something that's widely applicable. Or, what has come up several times, and I'm almost delighted that this is Reddit has come up several times because, again, there's a lot we can say about Reddit, and I'm not an avid user of it. We're actually going to interview a Reddit moderator later in the season to kind of get some insights on this. But there are some simple mechanisms within that allow members of a community to self-correct any misinformation. Our first guest, Susanna Fox, she thinks a lot about kind of patient-led healthcare. And she's talked about in Reddit communities, especially those dealing with cancer, that the actual misinformation is very low in those communities because there's a lot of communal interest in getting stuff right. But when misinformation does happen, people jump in, not to shame anyone, but just to sort of correct the misinformation that's out there. So I think there are hints of it. I think we have a sense of what that looks like. And that's one of the things that Rachel and I are trying to do is develop what I think of as lenses, which are ways of looking at our work in a way that allows us to look at it in a slightly different way to kind of perhaps reveal any any vulnerabilities in the information spaces that we're designing.
So to give a concrete example, I remember that Elon Musk proposed the idea of basically user flagging, so
Mm,
community moderation rather than professional moderation.
right.
I think that professional moderation by actual fact checkers has become a polarized
Yeah.
topic. It's so tragic because I I was inspired to come on this journey a little bit because I have people very close to me who've gone fully down the rabbit hole
Right.
and have done what I call the truth inversion. So if you're qualified, if you're educated, if you're certified, if you're part of an institution, these are all checks. These are all marks against you. If you learned about your domains, if you're an actual doctor, then you've been indoctrinated.
Right.
I had someone who doesn't know anything about Latin roots make that crack about, that's the reason they call it indoctrination. And so that's the kind of the feeling. So it's this idea that the more traditionally respected the source, the less it should be trusted, which makes fact checkers completely useless because the fact checking is an institution where experts actually look at the research and the facts, and therefore that's how you know that they're liars because they're part of the conspiracy. So I have these people in my life, and I don't know how to. I still haven't kind of solved this one, obviously. But what bothers me about that is that you propose something like community moderation as an antidote, which sounds good on the surface. Okay, so people will point out misinformation when they see it. But it ignores, first of all, you're putting truth up to a vote, which doesn't work because the majority can be wrong and badly. We just have to look at history to look at the times that the majority has been really wrong about some deep factual and ethical questions.
Yeah. We don't even that far back? Yes.
No,
Yeah.
like within our lifetimes.
Yes.
So the majority can be badly wrong. So putting truth up to a vote doesn't work. And then also it ignores the concept of filter bubbles, which is that the community who's going to see my junk that I put out there is my community,
Right.
which is already predisposed to think like me. So what you that get then is an automatic fragmentation of truth, which is that, the truths that my community believes will survive, and the lies that or mistruth or misinformation that we believe in will also survive. So I'm using truth in air quotes there.
I was just to respond to that. So there's a lot of work in among academics who study disinformation of how to improve media literacy. And again, this is sort of part of the impetus for my work is that's putting a huge onus on the consumers of information, which is fair. Like, yes, you should be responsible for the things that you are consuming and thinking critically about them. One of the strategies that they talk about is called, I think it's called lateral reading, right? And the idea is I'm not just going to read from one source. If I read something, I'm going to look across at different sources about the same topic to get a more well-rounded picture, let's say, right? Or look at kind of all the different potential viewpoints or perspectives on this, even if there's not really a lot of disagreement. It's just good practice to like not focus on just one source. So that's the technique. It's called lateral reading, and again, it puts a lot of onus on, and they've found it to be fairly successful. That folks who held a view very strictly, when they were asked to do some lateral reading, their perspective on that view. And our information spaces are not well designed to promote or encourage lateral reading. So, yes, I completely agree with you that, community driven sort of fact checking can either, puts an onus on the community to do that stuff, can backfire, can reinforce negative views. So, what are some of the other approaches that we can use? What if we design an information space that not only permits but demands, whatever features that we come up with that are similar to this idea of lateral, that are grounded in this idea of lateral reading? Um, and again, I don't know that anyone's ever done that. I don't know if it's a good idea, but we're at the very beginning of this journey, and I don't I don't like the Elon Musk the Twitter solution for the same reason that you do. It feels bolted on. It feels like a cop out, right? It feels like a way for Twitter or X not to take responsibility for some of the stuff that's posted. And I would like to change the mindset of like, what if we, as designers of platforms, a designer of these ecosystems, take more responsibility? And even if that means raising the bar a little bit, changing the metrics around engagement, whatever it is, to understand, to encourage these more resilient spaces.
So I can already picture a few things. Mm. So I notice design patterns in applications I use. So for example, YouTube lets me create playlists. Instagram is horrifically bad at letting me manage what I want to keep track of. So there's apps which encourage you to just hook up the feed to hook up the feeding tube and just lie back and let them handle everything. Clockwork Orange styles. So
Yep.
just turn on the screen and let
Let it rip. Yep.
let it rip. And so then there are other applications which put you into control of managing. So I haven't done this yet. I'm going to probably do a whole episode about my tips.
Mm.
And I have tips like create playlists. Don't make a conscious and intentional decision about what you want to consume.
Yep.
Don't let the algorithm don't just sit down and open your mouth and let the algorithm feed you. There's the letting people curate and make intentional decisions about what they want to do. We have the problem that we're fighting you're fighting for attention from tools that are basically, you're offering nutritious balanced meals that might have to be home prepped, and the other people are offering fast food straight into the car window. So that, it's hard. Like, there has to be a balance of market desire. Like, I think there is now. Like, people are being more conscious. Like, I don't want to eat McDonald's hamburgers all day every day as my information diet. But what I was picturing when you were talking was, I don't want to get too nerdy, but the use of tagging. So if I have a thing, a post, a tweet, a article, a blah, whatever, in an environment, we have the ability today to automatically tag that and say, what is this talking about? Is it talking about the war in the Middle East? Is it talking about Ukraine? Is it talking about the survival of the species? What are the key topics here? And facilitating that lateral reading and saying, do you want to explore this topic laterally? We don't do that today. We don't give you we give you the feed, which just kind of goes by, rolls by your eyes, or dead ends. Here's a post. Aren't you outraged? Like or reshare. Those are your options.
Right.
But explore is not there. And so that seems like an obvious, easy way to do that. Have you heard of an app called Ground News?
I keep hearing about it. Yes.
Okay.
I've not tried it, but I keep hearing about it.
Oh my God. Yes. Yeah. So I haven't pumped it enough on the pod yet. I'm obsessed with it because what it does is it algorithmically curates a news feed for you, but every item in that feed is a summary of the topic being discussed, and then you have a whole menu, and it literally gives you a spectrum. It buys into the very kind of American-centric left-right binary, but it gives you a left-right spectrum, left-right center spectrum, and you can see which outlets are reporting this, which are not, how do they report it differently, and it gives you things like, it tells you, do you want to check your own blind spots? Do you know that you haven't been checking about this story? Did you know that you haven't been checking these sources? Did you know who owns these sources? So it actually tells you about the ethical sourcing of the ingredients of your information diet. So, and I think that kind of app,
yes,
once you've gone there, it's so hard to go back. It's such a, it's not like I still get tons of my news off YouTube, but when I want to actually learn about something, that's such a better way for me to feel comfortable that I'm getting a more balanced picture, or I'm aware of the context. That's it. I'm aware of the context around what I'm consuming, and that the modern web, the web as we know, it feels like it's been on a mission to destroy context.
Yes, I love that observation. We talk a lot about framing on Unchecked, and how sometimes the information itself is true, but the way it's framed makes it untrue. And I wish I could think of a good example. Reading a lot about sort of the role of the mainstream media and media manipulation in the distribution of disinformation has made me very critical and sensitive to a lot of media. So I like what you're saying about Ground News. If the intent is to sort of disarm the ability for any one news source to kind of captivate all of my attention, and to ground anything that I'm reading in this kind of larger context. So even if I don't go to any of those other sources, there's sort of a seed has been planted that there's more to this than maybe you're just getting in your single source.
Yeah, I love it. And there's something magical by just scrolling by horizontally and seeing all the ways that the headlines are written about the same story.
That's incredible. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, so I don't want to turn this into an ad for Ground News, but the idea is that there are ways to try to recontextualize and restore context to information.
You mentioned tagging earlier, and tagging I mean, as an information architect, tags are a huge, important tool for me in the work that I do because it establishes context. We had on the show Dr. Adam Ratner. He's a pediatric infectious disease specialist in New York City. He has a book out called Booster Shots, where he goes into measles epidemics and the more recent measles epidemics and kind of what caused them and vaccine hesitancy and all the rest of that. And he gave us this an example that I was not aware of, that go look in the vaccines tag or category on Amazon, you will see many, many books about the dangers, the so-called dangers of vaccines. And that's
most of them.
because, yeah, and that's because the tag is essentially being misused. Or is it, right? The assumption, I guess,
Arguably, they are about vaccines.
right. The assumption is that when you click on the vaccines tag, you will see stuff about, how vaccines work. But now it is filled with these self-published books that contain misinformation or that are exclusively misinformation. We call that out on the podcast as double tagging, right? This idea that I'm using it, it's like double speak, but double tagging, right? I'm using this tag in a way that it was not intended to further my own agenda or whatever that is. So I think I think it's really interesting to kind of think about how the existing information systems that we have created also are ripe for abuse too.
Oh, God, yeah. So I can think of two other examples which jump to mind. One is the NotAllMen hashtag.
Oh yeah, good stuff.
I remember talking to women at the time who said that it was so quickly co-opted. Like the idea was for victims to share their stories. Obviously, not all victims are women, but the idea was for victims to share their stories, and it very quickly became a way for people who wanted to shut down the discussion to just say, well, not all men, and then just close the dialogue. And the other one that I think about is Save the Children. So Save the Children was about saving children. And now it's a dog whistle for QAnon. It's saving the children from the pedophile conspiracy run by the vaccine manufacturers and big tech. So
right.
It's very hard to control that.
Yes.
And so I don't know what useful I'm or constructive I'm adding, but I'm pointing out. I think understanding the failure modes is important.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think that's when hashtags were invented, right? Maybe someone thought, oh, these could be abused, right? But I think it's also important to recognize the evolution of this ecosystem, right? Hashtags are sort of like a user-invented tool for tagging content, and it morphed, right? We started to build product around the use of tags, never thinking about the potential abuse of those tags. Is it because it evolved gradually? Is it because it evolved out of users? Is it because the field is dominated by a certain demographic and they don't think about abuse, right? There's any number of reasons why it evolved that way. But now we are in an information space where we have created these mechanisms that not only allow, but in some ways encourage abuse.
Let's say.
And so, I think about these examples anytime a designer will, sort of says, well, what can we do about it? Like, what role do we have? There's the people, if this is how they want to use it, this is how they use it. And I think we can be more deliberate in how we shape these spaces so that we can try and prevent this kind of co-opting, for example. I don't know what it looks like, but no one's experimented with it. Like, let's get out there and start experimenting with it.
I have something on my mind which I want to get out.
Go for it. This is a safe
I
space.
don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it's in context or not, but it's just I feel like I can't move on to the next topic because it just keeps
Let's
coming
do it.
back in my mind. Because we're talking about like we didn't know, and I feel very guilty, and I feel very guilty on this whole truth collapse thing that I waited so long to speak up because I remember in 2015, and I try to stay very strictly apolitical. So whether you think this is about Trump or Obama or Biden or Stephen Miller, you pick your poison. But in around it's now the 10th anniversary of when I was talking with my friends about the rise of authoritarianism in the US, which was a super hot take 5 years ago. Like I was a nutball that and 10 years ago people thought it was totally insane for even mentioning the topic. And my point here is that if you're interested in this, if you're worried about this, getting aware of the mechanisms of how this works and how it's been done and how it's been done intentionally, how it's been done by some of the best in the business, how it's been done by, the KGB during the Cold War and the CIA during the Cold War. Learning about how information and narratives can be weaponized and manipulated is just useful. I'm from Latin America. My family's Peruvian. We're familiar with dictators and autocracies. So, like what was happening for me in the US is that everyone just kind of believed we can take all the ingredients of a cake, mix them up in a bowl, put them in the oven, wait, and we won't get a cake. And I was going, no, you're going to get a cake. It doesn't matter if you're the richest country in the world or whatever, that if you go down this path, it only leads in one direction.
Right.
And when I come to back to the design concept, I say that the internet or the digital kills context and it also destroys space and time. We live in a constant now. Like Justin Timberlake gets beaten up for stuff he did literally 20 years ago.
Right.
Because on Google, when I hit enter, what happened 20 years ago and what happened yesterday are presented in the same way. It doesn't matter. And I think it's a bit of a call to, we're nearly on time now. I'm just putting a call to action about this is a pressing issue that affects all of us. And I guess if you're listening to this podcast, you kind of already know that. But I have found it so useful to get out of the North American or Western bubble and see how do people form opinions and how have they formed opinions in other environments. Because I think we had an illusion of immunity in the industrialized world that couldn't happen here. Philosophy. I was in London for Brexit. And then
Following you around.
Yeah, exactly. I was in London for Brexit, and the British were telling me, nah, not going to happen, couldn't happen, impossible, just absurd. And then I was there at the beginning of the shift in American politics, to put it politely. And in both cases, I remember being on a WhatsApp group with my friends and going like, and them going like, how bad could this get? Like, are you talking about boots on the ground? And me lifting my finger and like wanting to type and scream, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about secret police. I'm talking about, unmasked, unmarked cars, and I'm talking about boots on the ground. And even me being unwilling to put that in writing at the time. Just to say that we are in a place where we all have to be open to thinking about what are the externalities, what are the long-term outcomes, what are the unintended outcomes of what we're participating in.
Yes. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, and I'm a natural optimist. I can't help but think things are going to be okay, and it's going to be a shitty journey, and I may not see that, but I have children, and I want to leave the world. Or I have to believe for their sake that the world that they will have in their adulthood and when they hopefully have children of their own will have learned at least a little bit. The one thing in the here and now that keeps me optimistic, and this may be naive, so I'm optimist, but I'm naively optimistic, is as as devastating and as harmful as the technologies that we work on have been in how they've been used. They there's never been in human history a higher resolution mirror for civilization, and makes people aware of their own. Nothing raises self awareness like a mirror. And now we have this reflective surface in the form of the internet. And I don't think, and and at the same time, it is beyond any one person's or one entity's control. One of the things that earlier authoritarians had was the capacity to control every aspect of the media. And now we have a media ecosystem that is bigger, literally, than anything else in the world and cannot be controlled. Um, so now we have this thing that's uncontrollable, and it is a vast mirror that helps us look at ourselves. And I think that it will take some time, but in the long run, that self awareness that it will cultivate will compel us to, how did Obama put it, continue to uh, bend the arc of the universe towards justice.
I agree. I I do feel that, and I know that we will figure it out. You know, we and I do. It's the I do think that the self-awareness and the maturity of societies kind of goes up and to the left, like up and to the right, up and to the right. I agree. Well said. We'll figure this out in time. I'm not going to say it's going to get better before it gets worse, but I think
Definitely
we'll
got to
figure
get
this
worse
out.
before it gets worse, before it gets better. So,
Yeah. But also, good thing that I'll add to that is that secrecy was an asset. That so you're kind of alluding to, or maybe putting what you just said in different words. When you control the information space, one of the things is that you're depending on what you don't want to be known, just keep being from known. But what is kind of good about this is that everyone's sort of addicted to the clicks on all sides. And so people are doing things much more publicly
yes,
and than they were ever done before. And so
yes,
your action reaction time becomes shorter. So you do
yes,
something and then people can react to it immediately. So they're in high resolution real time, as all mirrors are a real time mirror. So your ability to know what's going on, have a public reaction, motivate, organize, do something about it is enhanced. And also when you have a bunch of people who are motivated to share all of their actions, then mm, it's just harder for them. It's not the kind of people who can actually stay in the shadows because we promote those who want to be in the spotlight,
right.
and those,
Larger than life. Yeah,
yeah, and it's a contradiction in terms. You can't have somebody who's simultaneously addicted to the spotlight yet good at lurking in the shadows. So
right.
that kind of helps.
Yes.
All right, so Dan, thank you so much for joining us. That I got to say that these episodes with you have gone by faster than ever than many I've ever done. It's been a
I,
pleasure. I think
I'm grateful for the opportunity to reflect on Unchecked because we haven't taken a step back to kind of think about it. We've just been heads down producing episodes, signing interviews, things like that. And so this was really helpful to kind of just take a step back and take stock of how far we've come and what we've thought about. So thank you.
my pleasure. So, is there, if we're going to end on anything, do you have like a favorite lesson that jumps out at you that you've learned from doing Unchecked?
Um,
Top of your head.
Rachel and I do this segment at the very beginning of every episode where we look at a story from history about misinformation and disinformation. And I've really enjoyed doing looking back at history. I mean, it's kind of terrifying just to see how far back it goes and the ways people have used disinformation. But um, it's I don't know that I've got a lesson so much as one of the takeaways is yes, a lot of this feels new and a lot of it feels unprecedented, but we are just seeing the same old human behaviors again and again. So in some ways it's stuff that we've dealt with before. And you can go to any moment in history and see how people used disinformation to further their agenda and see how people circumnavigated it back then. And I think there's something to be said for digging into that. I have a little book recommendation, if that's okay. There's Anna Lee Newitz has a book out called Stories as Weapons, um, which there's lots of books out there on disinformation, but I really like this one. It's very accessible, and they talk about sort of all aspects of disinformation and propaganda and stuff like that. So it's a great overview.
Fantastic. All right. Dan Brown, host of the Unchecked podcast. Do check that out where you get your podcasts. Please let your friends know about this one. We do a little bit of marketing, but we are trying to live our truth by not hammering people to death about this. So we do rely on word of mouth. Let your friends know, and please let us know. This is a hard topic and it's hard work, and your feedback really fuels us. So thank you so much, everybody who's listening. Thank you, Dan, and see you all next time.